Welcome to the Two Stewards Show. My name's Mark, and I'm here with Brent, as always.
Hello, everybody.
And we're excited today. We've got a guest on. His name is Glen Sutherland. And Glen, if you're watching, you can see behind him, he's got his logo there, a Canadian investing in the U.S. And, I mean, that pretty well, I think it explains it. So welcome to the show, Glen.
Pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah. So, I was saying before we got started, I've kind of been keeping an eye on Glen over the last, a couple of years, I guess. And you're a Canadian. You said you're in Ontario.
Yeah.
And you've been investing. How long have you been investing in the States?
2016. So I don't know how. I like to throw a number out there. If I say a certain number of years, it kind of, people listen to this in like 10 years and they're like.
That's right.
This guy's a rookie.
So that's interesting because I was thinking, if you invested in Canadian real estate in 2016, by 2022, like, you were a genius, right? Like, wow, you're incredible. You're such a good investor, right? If all you did was just buy a house and kind of sat on it,
yep.
Right? And things have changed now. But what was your impetus to get into U.S. investing when Canada just looked, from an equity perspective, anyways, even cash flow looked so good? Well,
I guess back then, the honest truth is I was small time when I was doing it in Ontario. So I was investing in Ontario. I think at the most I had 5 or 6 semi-detached at the same time. So that was kind of my bread and butter. I'd buy a semi-detached. We'd renovate it, and then we put a tenant in. I call it like a slow flip, and then we'd sell it a year later or something like that, or 2 years whenever the tenant's left. Do another cleanup and let it go, right? And some of that was just for capital gains and just because, better be taxed passively. And anyway, so I was doing that, and I got to a point where back then I still had a job, and doing that, the banks were starting to say no. They're like, you need to make a lot more money in your 9-to-5 job, right? You need to be, to be able to support having all these mortgages. And in my head, I'm going, what does me having money have anything to do with these rental properties? Or like me, being able to support all these mortgages. I don't know how this is related to the two of them, right? Because I'm like, the tenants pay those, right? So back then, real estate, podcasting was not the same as it is today. Today there's podcasts, millions of them, right? And even hundreds of them just out of Canada, right? Back then, at least to my knowledge, there wasn't at least a big Canadian real estate podcast, right? So, and even for podcasting about real estate, I think there was only 5 at the time, right? And they were big companies in the U.S. So I got listening to that, and that was kind of, I was like my aha moment. I'm like, hey, I'm not going to have some of these same issues that I have here in Ontario, and I can just go into the U.S. and I can get as many mortgages as I want. I'm not, honestly, I used to property manage myself. It is not my expertise. I pat anyone on the back, like yourself, Mark, who does that, because it is hard, and I trust people way too much. And because of that, I was at the Ontario Landlord Tenant Board quite often.
Here comes Glen again.
Yeah. So some of those things, like I would take vacation from my 9-to-5 job back then to go work on my projects. Just being farther away, I didn't have that ability, right? And sometimes you're your own worst enemy, and I am my own worst enemy. I would go and work when I take vacation to work. I was having mortgage trouble. I was having troubles with the landlord tenant board. It just took a lot of stuff that I didn't have the opportunity to do it myself. It just pulled it out of my hands. Was a lot of it at that point. I've learned a lot since then about all the other advantages, but at that point it was just a way to continue to expand from the hurdles I was starting to see.
Yeah. So, before we get further in, what is your background? Did you come from a long line of real estate investors, like the Trump family?
My parents have had a duplex forever, but the thing was, it was a house that I lived in when I was from grade 1 until grade 11. And then I moved, and I had to switch schools in middle of high school. My parents converted that property into a duplex, and then I was their handyman to do all this stuff, right? So it's just that one duplex, and what I like to say is it's not how I learned how to do this, because my parents didn't do it the professional way, if you put it that way.
Learn how not to do it, I guess.
Yeah, but there was a lot to it, and just even the mindset about it was like, when I bought my first property, was like, hey, if I buy this property and I rent it out and I don't have to pay the rent, or I pay for this mortgage in 25 years, I'll at least have the value of this house, right? And honestly, I don't even look at stuff like that at all anymore. But it was such a they had a property, they moved, and then they converted it and started renting it out. So I learned a lot from that about renovations and fixing and repairs, and the time it takes to do repairs, which honestly is one of the things, if you've never done it yourself and you start hiring other people, you can get really frustrated about timelines and stuff if you don't understand how long some of this stuff actually takes.
That's what I tell my wife all the time at our personal home. You just don't understand, dear.
It's all summer to mow the grass.
Yeah. So that's kind of the background for that. And like my 9-to-5 job I had was nothing related to real estate at all. Like it did give me the ability to, like, I was on the road a lot, so I could listen to a lot of podcasts and do a lot of courses and learning while I was commuting. But it directly related to real estate had no connection at all.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so that's interesting, because that's something I realized as well. My wife and I are self-employed, and having one mortgage, fine. Having two mortgages, okay. But getting a third, forget about it, right? Unless you have and we're not high income earners. We're not lawyers or something.
Exactly.
So that's kind of what also drove me initially to look at investing in the States, is just that ability to invest through a corporation and do DSCR loans, or I'm sure you've got many tools for people, which we can get into, but that was one of the initial things. And then do you think about the value of the Canadian dollar versus the U.S. dollar at all? Does that enter into your thinking at all now?
Well, right now it's really nice being paid in U.S. dollars. So for people who are listening to this at future time, and it's like 136, 1.36
How are we paying you?
So it is nice to get paid in U.S. dollars, but when you're starting, it is it's kind of a wall you're kind of going up against, right? I still does come into consideration a lot when you're working with private lenders or bringing in joint ventures, is the exchange rate, right? Because honestly, if someone put money in with you now, and then say the dollar, the Canadian dollar gets stronger, you go to pay their money back, you might not be giving them back as much money, right? Even and that's one of the things that I've learned, is I used to accept money from anybody for either currency, and that would be fine. Whereas now I accept it in American currency. It simplifies a lot of things. It simplifies the direct deposits, especially if they have an American account. If people want to deal with a Canadian account, then they'll just cut them a whole pile of U.S. checks, and they can deposit it, RBC in Toronto or TD in Toronto or whatever bank they want to, deal with in Canada. They can just U.S. currency account, right? So it does factor in. And I have an example where I did borrow money in Canadian dollars, a similar amount, and money in the U.S. American dollars at the exact same time from two different lenders, one from Markham, who was lending in U.S. dollars, and one from Alberta, who was lending in Canadian dollars. And at the end of the project, the currencies completely changed. The one that was in the American dollar, the one in the Canadian dollar, let's start with that. Whenever I went to pay them back, I had to come up with an extra $12,000 just to make from what our original plan was. Everything went to plan, and I went to pay them back, but it was an extra $12,000 I had to come up with, right? That just vanished because of currency exchange. And the other side of it is the person who lent me the U.S. dollars from Markham. When we finished the project, they were like, Glenn, this this isn't great. I'm like, as a private money lender on this, I only made $12,000, and I think their payments were around $1,000 a month for a year. And they're like, I basically make nothing because of the exchange rate, right? And just the changing the context of the conversation. When I was dealing with the person from Alberta and Canadian funds, I just had to come up with that money and pay it. And whenever you're dealing with someone with American funds, you're kind of, I don't like to say power position, but you are in that negotiation, right? But you have the ability to come up with ideas for them. You can come up with solutions. You could re-borrow the money. You could put the money out in a different way. They could lend it against a different project. Those are just what pop in my head right now. But like, you can start to come up with solutions. So I'd rather be in that position where I can start coming up with like, hey, the dollar didn't go as the right way. Sometimes it goes the other way and they double what they expected to get. But sometimes it goes the other way and they're a little disappointed, but you find a way. You figure out, you have conversations. When do you need this money? What's this money for? Are you just looking to private lend it again? And if you don't need the money, like I know lots of other people that would happily have that money, right? And keep it working for you until the dollar's at the current spot. It's usually the easiest way to do it, is just keep the money working until it fixes itself. But there is lots of other strategies you could employ, right?
I just want to jump in. So you're investing in the U.S., so Canadian investing in the U.S. Like, to me, when I read that, I'm like, that is such a big, like, there are so many places to invest. So maybe you can kind of go over with listeners what is the investment landscape like in the U.S.? Like, what types of properties are you involved with? What are you looking at? Are there specific markets and reasons? Like, it's such a broad thing to say. Like, when you look at Canada, it's just like these three pockets, right? We got Toronto, we got maybe, some in Montreal, some in Vancouver, but US is like, whoa, there's people everywhere.
Yeah, well, there's literally 10 times as many markets as there is in Canada. And I think that's what, honestly, with the people who take my course, that's the hardest question to answer, is to where to go. There's 10 times the amount of cities. And I've heard the other argument, if you went way up north, you could get the same numbers as Cleveland or something like that. But you're dealing with a city with like multi-million people versus a city with like multi-hundred people.
200 people.
But anyway. But there's so many choices, and even for even types of real estate, right? Single families. And it's about like what kind of strategy you even want to do, and I usually want to start there, right? Because some people I just want to flip, and you're like, well, and some people I want to burr, right? Some people I want to do some of the American creative strategies that they don't have in Canada, and that's why they want to go down there. They want to go do a subject to, which is where you split the deed from the financing, and then the financing stays with the previous owner, and the deed moves to you, right? Which, as far as I know, you can't do that in Canada. So some people just want to, figuring out what they want first, right? And what I like to give the comparison is like, hey, you want to, what are you trying to do? So if you wanted to say, I do flips in the Space Coast in Florida is one of the spots. I work in 9 different markets, but just this as an example. You want to go there, you can flip and you'll make a larger chunk on your money. But if you want to do that in, say, Cleveland, as a comparison, you will make a higher percentage on your money. You might not make, $80,000 on a flip. You might make 20. But percentage-wise, based on what you started with, you're starting with a much cheaper property in doing that. So some of it comes down to, if you're just talking flips, what is your appetite? What do you have for funds, and where would that work best in the U.S., right? And in burrs, it's going to come down to a lot of different things. Like, honestly, you're going to be holding these for a longer period of time, ideally. So you're going to be refinancing and renting these out long term. So in those cases, you're going to want to find a market it's appreciating, right? If that's a thing still. But you want to at least a market that's strong. It has good, you're going to be able to rent this out. It's going to ideally appreciate. You're going to want that market to make sense, right? The rent to value ratios. Like, for instance, you might go into, let's say like Fort Myers, Florida or something, and you might buy a $400,000 place that rents for $3,000 a month or $2,800 a month, right? For a $400,000 place. But if you went into, somewhere anywhere in the Midwest, Michigan, Ohio, Missouri, you might be able to go buy a house for $100,000 that rents for like $1,500 a month. So like if you're looking at the rent to value ratios, the 1% rule that people like to talk about. Honestly, you know where that 1% rule came from? It was like some of these podcasters. They were turnkey operators, and that's what they could perform at. And so I'm like, whenever people come to do my coaching, like, oh, what about the 1% rule? Or, this is way above the 1% rule. And I'm like, yeah, but that doesn't matter. It's a stupid number. But anyway, they will perform better than that, right? And at least you should be buying, right? And we're in a time spot right now where you should be buying at a good discount, right? So it's a buyer's market. Before it was a seller's market. You can be pickier. You can ask for seller credits. You can ask for a lot of these things that aren't traditional in Canada for Canadian real estate, where you're not like, at least when I bought, I haven't asked for seller credits, closing credits, attorney credits, any of this stuff like that is really common in the United States.
Interesting. So yeah, just for listeners who might not know exactly what a BRRRR is, I don't know if we've done an episode on that specifically yet, but like buy, renovate, rent, refinance, repeat, I guess. So you're basically buying something that's dilapidated or under market value, and then you're putting in the work, and then you're going to be refinancing it once it's tenanted and pulling your money back out. Is that the strategy you're doing primarily, or there's different options?
So
depends on the market.
I don't focus on one strategy. So we like this year we're probably doing 10 houses a year. Last year we were doing like 45 a year of buildings that we were renovating. And even just to go way out of context, like this week we closed on a 136 unit apartment building in Florida. So we do everything. We've done some subject twos. We do seller financing. We do lease options on the sale, lease options on the purchase, which people are going, why would you do it on the purchase? Tons of ideas. We do all the creative financing strategies. We do BRRRRs. We buy from the banks, like REOs. We do short sales, foreclosures, pre-foreclosures, wherever we can get the deal. Is honestly the.
Well, I'm just imagining somebody starting out. They kind of got to pick a strategy or pick a market to, like, you got to build a network, you got to build a system, see what works. Like, you're not jumping into a whole bunch of different stuff right away. But
no, typically people when they're starting, they're either interested in doing a flip, they're interested in doing a BRRRR, like you just talked about, or they're interested in buying something that's either rent ready or a turnkey property. Is usually the three sections that they fall into. And it's a lot of it comes down to, like, you want to make the most money, it's going to be a renovation. You're going to have to force the value up on this. That's how you can refinance in 6 months and get all your money back to do it again, right? That's how you do it. But some people aren't comfortable with doing that right from the start. And sometimes they just, like, you put too many, like, I like to use the traffic light analogy down the road. Too many lights that have to be green, and they just stop. They just can't move any farther, right? And so if you just break it down, so hey, maybe we're buying something that's rent ready right from the start. We figure out our corporations, we figure out how this works, get property management, project managers, or you actually don't need project managers if you're not doing a renovation, but you get it all going, and then you do your refinance, or even you just put the mortgage on the property, and then you're like, okay, now I could add a few more pieces into it. I could add some renovations. I could add, and grow it slowly. And then there's the other people who are just like, I'm going to rip the Band-Aid off and I'm going for the home run right from the start.
I'm going to lose all my money.
So, you know what? Some do, and some are surprisingly, like, blow me away. I'm like, how well they did, right? And so part of it is, if you're going to go for that, honestly, I would, I have coaching, but even hire somebody else as a coach. But honestly, if you're going to go for the fences off the start, there's a lot of mistakes you can make and a lot of differences in the U.S.
What's an example of a mistake that you've made? Like, maybe you could share with people, because I can think of ones that I'm going to make, but you've probably done it before. So.
Some mistakes. So. That's actually a really good question. One I'm thinking about is we bought a property and we used crime maps in the U.S. to, when we're looking at neighborhoods and appreciation maps and stuff like this. And we were buying a property in...
It's interesting you list crime maps as the first criteria.
The thing is, people in Canada, we have blinders on. We do not have as scary of neighborhoods as they are. Our C neighborhoods are not their C neighborhoods. I don't even think in comparison, we don't have a D or E in Canada. They have much scarier areas that you can get by in. But anyway, yeah, for the one of the early ones that I did mess up on is we were looking at the appreciation map, and appreciation map, it tells a story that isn't true. It means that property is appreciating. It doesn't mean the neighborhood is any good at all. And for instance, like we bought there and it was appreciating. People were fixing it up, but it was still a scary place. And in that situation, the one I'm specifically thinking about, we were working with how do we buy that? We bought that from a wholesaler, and we weren't involving a realtor, because sometimes a realtor could be able to tell you, like, hey, this is a scary spot, or a property manager bringing a property manager. That's another mistake too, was I bought some properties and hired the property manager, and then once they got the addresses, they didn't want to manage them. Because they're like, no, we don't manage anything south of this road, right? We don't do this whole area. And, some of the stuff that cash flows the best doesn't necessarily cash flow the best, because you're going to have a higher vacancy, higher turnover rates in some of those neighborhoods. And I've even found buying like multifamily, sometimes you buy one-bedroom places, and you still get great tenants in them, but the people who rent one-bedrooms, even in Canada, nobody wants to be in a one-bedroom. They're typically transitioning from, they just got divorced, something happened, there's a life incident, and they're getting their act together, and then they're going to move back up, right? Especially if they have good credit, and they met all the boxes for your landlord, or so your property manager to put them in there. That they're going to check all the boxes to move up, to be happy with Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, HUD financing, and they're gonna go buy something else, right? They're just in a spot, so you're going to pay for another turnover, right? But we'd have security deposits in the U.S. instead of last month's rent, so you don't necessarily, in all honesty, rarely give that back, because usually that's going towards carpet cleaning and paint and whatever else needs to be touched up between tenants, right?
Sorry,
it was a long rant with like three answers all at once.
Well, I got another question that so if you're a Canadian, you're going down there, in my head, I'm thinking you probably have some unique challenges as opposed to a U.S. Like if you're competing against the U.S. locals buying these properties, maybe there's U.S. investors looking at the same deal. Like what challenges are unique to a Canadian coming down? Like is a Canadian able to compete well, or is it just exactly the same thing? They don't know you're a Canadian, you're offering on this deal.
No, it is different being a Canadian down there. Like typically,
like do you have to factor in a higher certain number on something because U.S. doesn't have to pay that, and you're going to?
Well, it's actually lower. So like typically for like leverage, you're going to get a lower leverage rate, especially off the start, right? You might get 70% loan to value on a straight purchase loan. Typically off the start, you're going to get 65% loan to value. On a refi, and you can probably even get 90% loan to value and 100% of the construction right from the start. Sometimes it might be on your very first one, you might be at 80-100 loan, but typically you might be able to do a 90-100, which means 90% of the purchase and 100% of the renovation covered by the lender, right?
As a Canadian,
yeah.
Right.
But like now, I just went and got my in 2023. Last year, I went and got my E2 visa. So now I do the American lending side. So you just boost that up. You do the more closer to Canadian sort of leverage rates, where you're going to do 80% on a purchase loan and 75% loan to value on a cash out refinance, right?
So you're saying you can get more debt as a Canadian, as an
American, you get more debt.
Okay.
Yeah, they're going to give you a higher leverage rate. So so on a $100,000 place, you might be able to put a mortgage on it for like 100,000. Nice easy numbers, but $100,000 place, you get like on a purchase loan, $80,000 loan, you're going to come up with 20. But as a foreign national, you might be coming up with 30% down for it until you establish some things, right?
So moving back a little bit. So one of your businesses is coaching, and we can talk about that a little bit. But I'm just thinking, for somebody getting started in U.S. investing, if you're coaching them, do you advise for them on their first deal, like get a partner or partner with, do a joint venture with someone who's got experience? Is that a good way to go, or you just go ahead, jump in and see how you do?
I think it depends on the person. I think a lot of people can completely jump in. But in our mastermind, what we started doing was we do a pitch session every single meeting where 3 people pitch their deals. Because what I found is that there's people that, everybody who's in the program wants to know how to do everything. And then there's some people that don't have the time or are just flat out scared. And those are the perfect people to partner. So you just put the 2 people that are in the program together, and they both understand. You're using the same sheets. You understand the strategy, and they work really well together because they understand what the expectations are. Because in my program, I show them how I run my program. They know what the communication is supposed to be like. They know how it's supposed to run, because the other person who's the working partner is basically just taking the template and filling it in. So I think it could go both ways. And I think it might come down to get educated and then go do it. And if you can't find the time, you're struggling, you're just at that spot, that's the time, because honestly, you're going to make more money doing it yourself, obviously. Yeah. But if some people that it's needed, and it's not a bad thing. On all honesty, because my first 3 properties I bought in the United States were turnkey properties, because I was just trying to figure this out. I hadn't figured out lending or anything at that point. I just sort of jumped and would figure it out later. But when I bought those back in 2016, if I would have joint ventured with somebody, I would have been able to free that equity up a lot faster than buying a turnkey property. Just like you were mentioning right off the start, by buying back then, I got bailed out because the properties appreciated and was able to refinance and get the cash out of them so I could do more projects. But in a flatter market like we're talking about now, it's something to think about, is how are you extracting this cash eventually? Because you always should be thinking about how you're going to get this money back at some point. And if your only way you're getting this back is by the market turning, that's not really, that's kind of a scary spot to be at, right? Where I want to have multiple exits. I want to be able to sell the property. I want to be able to refinance the property. I want it to work as a rental. I want it to work as a flip. I don't want to be stuck in one spot, and it just, that's it. I have to wait for a strategy to play itself out. That either country, that's a scary spot. You want to have multiple exits. Right now, I want to buy. At the minimum, that if I had to sell it the next day, that I could afford that 6% realtor or 5% realtor, or whatever. Realtors tend to be more expensive if you're in the cheaper houses. But you want to be able to afford to pay them to sell it the next day and not be upside down, at the very least, even if you're buying some sort of turnkey, rent-ready. Because right now you can go make offers. People are open to taking them right now because stuff is longer days on market and people need their money out for whatever reason they have.
So one thing I've heard about the U.S. is they have these 30-year mortgages that everyone's locked into. Are you finding, so the logic there, I guess, is that, so if somebody buys a house in the States, they can lock in their interest rate at 30 years at whatever it was 2 or 3 years ago, rock bottom. Mm-hmm. And so they're not incentivized to sell. So what kind of things are out there? Are people selling the property or just not selling the property because the loan is so good? Or are they selling it with the financing somehow attached to the property? Or what are you seeing in the States with regards to that?
Yeah, so it doesn't, like you just mentioned, it doesn't have the same pain as Ontario. Some people are getting those hikes or they're coming up for renewals. It's forcing them to sell. So they're not necessarily having those same things. But everyone always talks about the 30-year long-term and amortization in the U.S., but it's not necessarily what everybody takes because they just still have variable rates, but they don't call them variable rates. They call them ARM mortgages. So they're adjustable rate mortgages. So they adjust every once a year. Typically, sometimes if you get like a 3.6. It's a 3-year term, but it's still a 30-year mortgage.
Right.
But it'll adjust every 3.6, it'll adjust every 6 months. A 3.1 would adjust once a year. So they don't put the point in there.
Right.
It really should be 0.6. But what was the original question? But yeah, people aren't forced for those sort of things. So seller financing and
I'm
stuff.
just thinking like how that would affect inventory, and like if you're going out there shopping, is there any kind of concerns around the amount of people who are listing their property or not choosing not to because the financing they have is so good? Or are you able to, as an investor, like, transfer the mortgage to yourself or like anything like that? I'm so naive to
you
this.
can transfer the mortgage to yourself if they're open to it, right? And it also, like, if you're just trying to move the mortgage to yourself, it's going to depend on what was underwritten on that mortgage, right? So some of them they can transfer easily, some of them they can't transfer easily. Some of them you might want to talk about, like doing a subject to, like we were talking about at the very start, where you split the mortgage and the deed and you just leave the mortgage with the previous seller. That will show up in their credit report though, so it will affect them being able to buy other things, so they may not be open to that. But you just disclose it, you just tell them the risks and the benefits, and honestly you'll be able to pay more money if you can get a better interest rate. So sometimes that's the driving factor to them, right? They can get a higher payment for it. But as for, like, they have different reasons to sell. There is higher inventory on the market than normal right now. There's a lot of properties that are the cheaper properties, so even stuff under $150,000. There's a higher percentage that are in cash, right? And interest rates are higher, and it doesn't necessarily affect it the same, but like they might need the money for other things. They might need it even for loans that they did like a term loan on, because you can still set up a 5-year term loan, right? So they might still be exiting, or you don't know what their situation is with their private lenders or other things. So there's still opportunities to that. But when you see those sort of things and you see the advantage to the buyers is that the older rates are very appealing, that you can, do seller finance offers, right? And even my stuff that's sitting on the market, like for sale right now, we're getting tons of seller finance offers. For us, we're not interested in them. But that is, like, there are people that are just going and basically spamming the entire MLS to try to find someone who's willing to take a low money down seller finance deal, even if what they're offering you for the property might be like $20,000 or $30,000 or $50,000 above your asking price. But you're going to have to get it later.
Yeah. So the play there is that these people are trying to basically acquire assets without actually forking out any money.
Or very little
money,
very
little
$5,000 down or something, right? To
so you can buy a $50,000 or $100,000 house with very, very little down, and then you can buy 10 of them or 100 of them or whatever.
So there's a huge advantage for properties that need renovation, because a lot of times that's one of the big reasons they sell is if they've, like American mortgages, if they want to do like Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, they could maybe do a 97% leverage loan, so they're putting 3% down. So they can get into mortgages. Well, in Canada, you get a CMHC loan at 5%, right? It's not that far off, but but anyway, they get into these high leverage loans, and so they typically could have been renters
you have
before,
to post
and they didn't
your
need
gun
a whole
as
lot
collateral.
of money.
Like, here's my gun, I need a loan.
You got a nice gun.
Oh,
but if you get into these high leverage properties, right, if you're going to be a homeowner and then something happens, right, you bought this property for whatever price, and something happens, you put almost nothing down, and it something breaks, some plumbing breaks, a roof, whatever it is, they don't have necessarily those funds to do that, right? So if you're open to doing the renovations, the opportunities start to show up, because that people get into mortgages with very little down, especially if you're talking like $100,000 house with 3% down. You're not talking, and they ask the seller to pay the closing costs.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. So just for our listeners who may not be familiar with the U.S., Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac they're basically government-backed, like federally regulated government-backed lenders.
Yeah.
Who, if you, there's a whole bunch of different variables, right? Like veterans can get good lending, farmers, I don't know. There's a whole bunch of...
The VA loans, like, if you can inherit, like those people don't necessarily have to put any down. They're 100% leverage loans, not even like 80% leverage, like 100%, because they can get their VA loans backed with nothing down and ask for the closing. Like they make so many incentives for the veterans that it makes a lot of sense for a lot of people to join the military.
Yeah, no kidding. So for you, Glenn, like you're working in all these different markets, doing all different kinds of deals. How are you finding deals? Do you have someone like making calls, like a call setter, or do you just have a network of people like feeding you different projects? How are you working that?
Yeah, so I don't, and I don't do like the call center. Honestly, it's the honest truth is I just don't want to do it. And if I'm going to do anything, like if I was going to build one of those myself, I'm going to do it first, make sure I understand it, and then I'll systemize it and farm it off to somebody else, right? I think people who skip that step of doing it yourself get into trouble because they understand what's involved in it. I'm not interested in that. So for me, a lot of it comes from wholesalers is the largest chunk of it, and dealing with realtors, property managers, other leads, people you meet. Like other people you meet is some of the best contacts you can get, because that's how you get talking off market, right? Because technically if you're talking wholesalers, it's off market, but I want, like, if you're talking direct to seller, because that honestly is where you can really get the creative strategies. When you start talking to a realtor pitching creative strategies, even simple ones like seller financing, you have that person in the middle that is scared they're not going to get paid, and they might, just the way they word it to the homeowner, they'll word it to suggest not to take it. So just having them, you can work with them. And honestly, what I do is if I'm working with a realtor and I'm trying to buy it from a homeowner, I'll be like, hey, can I talk to them? And they'll be like, whoa, I don't want to get cut out of this deal, right? And you go, well, why don't you hire me, and I'll hire you as well. You can be the realtor on both sides. I'll sign a buyer representation agreement, or BRA, and it's going to be conditional for only this property. You're not like tied in, like you don't get all this stuff I'm doing. Be careful of that, because if you're active and you're buying a lot of their houses, you don't want them going, hey, I want the commissions for all those. No. But I'll for this deal, I'll put you on both sides, and you'll get paid more. Just let me talk to them. Right, I'd prefer to just pick up the phone and talk to somebody, because then you can explain it. You can have a proper conversation where you're like, hey, why you're selling, what's going on. You can try to figure out where their pain points are, how much money they actually need, what they're planning on doing with that money when they're done. Right, so you can just have a better conversation. You can build some rapport, and sometimes they might take your offer even if it's lower than somebody else's, because they understand what you're trying to do.
So how often do you go down to the States and like walk the streets and knock on doors?
So
how often do you go down to the States in general, I guess would be another question.
So going down to the States, it is it's not what people think. I don't go down there to like lift a hammer or even look over people's shoulders, right? There's people to do that, right? That's where you get the project managers to manage the contractors, right? So I have a whole system for that. So that kind of stuff runs itself. When I typically go down, honestly, is because I have students that want to see what the heck I'm doing.
Right.
And we just jump in a car, we go and tour some of the properties that are under renovation, and they see what's going on. I do go down, I don't know, maybe once a year to like certain markets. Some of the markets I've never been to in my life. But I go to some of them, and it's just to go and have a drink or have a coffee or, have a meal with some contractors, keep the relationship going. Because with any of these relationships, you'll find that they start off really good and they slowly perform less good. Is the easiest way to say it over time. So, keeping
Glenn's
up the relationships, making sure you're a priority.
We don't need to do the work. He just pays us.
Or this timeline slide, like they're always working on multiple projects at a time, contractors. So just making sure that you're a priority, make sure they remember you. Sometimes you can send gifts for birthdays, or I like to do my Canadian care package where you send some maple syrup and coffee crisps and other stuff that you can't get in Canada or can't get in the U.S. They're only Canadian. I just typically go down there to shake hands and do the more fun stuff. I'm traveling to Texas next week, but ours is we're looking at some larger 200-unit buildings, 3 of them. And what I found with those big ones is to doing single family, maybe let's backtrack, you don't need to go down at all. If you build the system properly, you don't need to go down. You can have this whole thing run itself. But when you're talking about the larger multifamily buildings, we get our offers accepted because we go down and we shake hands and we talk to these people. And sometimes it's because they get all these other offers and these other people have never seen the property. They've never gone to it. And what happens is they waste the seller's time. They put a letter of intent out. They basically have it under semi-contract. Mm-hmm. They drag it along for a month of due diligence, and then they find stuff. And then they back out, or they ask for price reductions, and you put their mind at ease a lot. If you show up and you have some contractor guys with you, property manager wants to see the property too, you look serious, you're touring, they met you, your offer is so much stronger. Even if it's and I'm not even kidding, some of ours were $700,000, $1 million less than other people, and that they would be interested in.
So you could basically have a private jet to fly you down there at that discount.
I am not that kind of guy.
I know.
I put a collared shirt on for this, but if you watch my podcast, I'm always in a t-shirt. So you watch, even if I make an absorbent amount of money, you'll never see me own a private jet or even justifying flying the private jet. I feel like I'd be doing a disservice to my people, right? They're like, what is he just wasting our money? What is
that's just an American thing that you see a lot, these bigwig America, in America. I think in Canada, you have 10 times less people, but you go to America, it's okay, now there's these crazy business people that are just extreme, and they're very flamboyant about it as well, it seems like, but it's just an image.
Yeah. It's a good flex, and depending on what kind of investors you're attracting, sometimes that works.
Yeah.
I might be way off base with this, but I find that Canadians respond better to more of a down,
humility,
real conversation than as much of the flash. They do, whereas Americans, I think, respond to the flash a little bit better, and the lifestyle that they see. Hey, that guy has it. I think I could, if I did something with them, maybe I could get some of that. Whereas I think the Canadians are more, what do I get it for an interest rate? What is this going to do? How do I get the money back? It's more of the, how does this actually work?
But you're talking about investing your time going down there. It's about relationships, and not having to go down there when it's just a single family home. It's such a smaller deal.
I've been to a lot of these markets, but there's literally more than half my portfolio I've never seen. I used to do properties in Indianapolis, like I was talking about in that one story. I've never been to Indianapolis in my life.
So you're looking at the numbers, you're looking at the people who can help you as a team down there, and then that's
it's about screening your people and meeting your criteria and looking for specific things when you're talking to them.
But you do get money come into your bank account, so this is a real place. It's real money. It comes in. You're not just
Well, I've never been down that path, but I've heard about people buying houses that don't even exist. But I personally haven't had that experience.
Not yet. I mean, my impression of the U.S., housing or real estate market is that it's just a lot more loosey-goosey than Canada. That's just my overall impression, and maybe that's wrong. But even what you've described, I've heard of people, talking about that strategy, okay, just get the place under contract so that nobody else, you just kill all the other bids, all the other interest, and then you go down at your leisure and look at it, and then you put the screws to them and be like, oh, it needs this, it needs that, and whatever. I'll just let it go if. Even closing.
That is more commonplace, right? And that happens when you're selling stuff, and it is it does happen all the time because they're looking, especially if it's an investor buying, and you're going to be looking at that. They want to get the best deal they possibly can, and I've had that, and it hurts you if they tie it up for too long because then you have to, on the MLS, it's going to say relisted, and everyone's going to go, why is it relisted?
Yeah.
Instead of saying listed, it's going to say relisted as the status, and you're like, I don't like that. No.
Yeah. Well, it's such a, cause just from looking at places in the States, like, looking on MLS or Zillow or whatever, like a property will go under contract, but that's not, Canada, generally speaking, once it goes under, like once it says pending or whatever, like that's a done deal. And if it doesn't happen, there's like people are getting sued, lives are ruined. Whereas, in the States, like even just closing dates, right? When my people were telling me like this, here's your target date. I'm like, you mean closing date? They're like, no, target date. That's when it probably will close. And like, the one we just bought, it like there, of course, we ran into all kinds of problems, and I think it got extended like a month or a month and a half or something like that, and nobody was really losing their mind. They're just like, okay, let's keep everybody in the loop. I'm just like, really? I can't believe that. So
it is way more common. It's just it's kind of like you said, a target date. It's not actually a closing date, and it moves and it's flexible, and people will even back out past the closing date on you, and then you're coming down to this some of the situations I've been in, and then they're like, hey, and you're like, here, sign this termination and release of all the earnest money deposit, right? And you go, yeah, right. And then they go, well, then we're not signing anything either, and you can't relist your property because we're still under contract, and you get into this back and forth pain in the butt, and so you might have to find some sort of middle ground on it, but it's that part is a lot looser. There is parts that are more tight, and property management, for instance, in the U.S. is a lot more stringent, and they have to have like a license to do that, which I don't believe that there's licensing, at least in Ontario, for
multi-unit. Yeah, if you're doing bigger things, but not single family. No,
you can have someone else just manage your property, which you technically could, but you shouldn't. You should be getting licensed people, right?
A lot of times it's a real estate license too, depending on the state, which is interesting.
So why do you live in Canada? You spend all your time investing.
I was going to ask you about the E2 visa, actually, because that kind of ties in.
So here, I'll answer the E2 visa first, and then I'll go why I live in Canada. So E2 visa, I have mine because I want the lending we talked about earlier, right, is one of the big things, and I also want it for taxes. So in Canada and the U.S., there's completely different tax laws. Some of the laws are better in Canada. Most of the laws are better in the United States. And what I want to do, or what my accountant wants me to do, is basically it's like splitting with, income splitting with your wife or something like you do in Canada. When there's certain governments in power. Right now you can't do that, I don't believe. But same sort of thing is I want to split up different types of income, because different types of income are like active income, passive income are taxed differently in both countries. And so you want to take advantage of both different laws. And if you're saying that I want to tax active income in the United States, for instance, how can you possibly say to Canada Revenue that you want to pay your tax there for the active income if you aren't actively allowed to work in the United States?
Yeah.
How do you do that? They could easily just disallow the whole thing and tax you on it. So you want to, if you want to try and do some of these things, you got to think about what their stance is going to be on this, and you have to, how they're going to argue it. And that's why you have good accountants, right? Why I live in Canada is I have kids. I have
there is a reason. Okay.
So I have a 7 and a 9-year-old, and I don't want to live. I don't want. Honestly, that's part of it.
It's a personal decision.
And then my wife would say, how do I quote this correctly? I get grumpy if I don't see my friends or family for like more than a week. I am a social being, and she's like, you're going to be miserable if like, because I pitched the idea like 6 years ago. Let's go to Alabama. There was this house, like $500,000, 10,000 square feet with a huge pool and a lazy river in the backyard on 20 acres. And I was just like, we could never get this. And she's like, you'd love it when we first showed up, and then you'd be bored floating around in your lazy river by yourself. It'd be miserable, and we'd end up back in Canada to hang out with your friends and family, right? I think it's part of it. Like some people, I want to like, I enjoy doing Airbnbs and touring around and going to different places. My wife came from a background where they had a cottage growing up, and she went to the same place every time. And she's not interested in that. So that's why we don't have like a place in Florida or a place in Texas, because she doesn't want to go to the same place every time. That's what she felt she missed out on growing up. So I would prefer to just like go down and tour. Like even if we haven't been snowbirding, but if we were going to start doing that, I'd like to, hey, let's do a month in Florida and let's do a month in, Europe and a month and wherever, right? Yeah. And sort of mix it around rather than even going to Florida for like the whole, 5 months or something. Also, if you were going to do that snowboarding stuff, I have a podcast on it, but if you go over the 6 months, you start losing your health care and a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Don't go over 6 months.
So the E2 visa is more for preferential tax treatment than thoughts of moving to the States.
Yeah, I personally don't have the like. I like Canada. I honestly, this last winter, I'm not a huge fan of like kind of cold. I either want it cold or I want it hot. Like I want to put a rink in my backyard. Or do like some fun stuff in the snow, or I want it to be warm, right? So I like this in the future, like years like this, I'll be like, I'm out of here. I'll just disappear for a few months. But it gives you the ability, right? If you wanted to, and you have that social security number that comes with the E2 visa. So depending, like a lot of those, any of those doors that you might not be able to do, or you want to hire. There's just little things, or you want to be hired for, being, what do you call it, like guiding some other project or whatever, and they want to hire you,
like a
then
GP
you're compliant, right? You can legally work in the United States. A lot less questions when you cross the border too.
Yeah, that's right. Can you give us the quick rundown? How do you qualify for an E2? Like there's many different visas, but the E2 is specific, right?
Yeah, the E2 visa is a business visa, right? So you have to have a business in the United States, depending on the attorney, because I talked to 3 different attorneys. But depending on the attorney, they're going to have different things they think you need to do in order to meet the visa, right? So you're going to have to. So a lot of times they're going to say you have to hire people. Some attorneys will say 5, some of them will say 2, but you're going to have to hire some people into your business. You're going to have an active business, an active role. Some of them are going to say you have to buy computers and desks and stuff for your future employees even before you hire them. Some of them say you don't have to do that. So it's kind of a mixed bag, and I think it's kind of like a seesaw. Like you're like, I'm willing to give this up, but I'm going to put more in on these things, and that's why my visa application will go through. Right?
So you ended up buying the desks, or
no? So for mine, I rented an office space.
Okay.
But I rented the office space from somebody that I already pay a monthly amount to. So you can read between the lines. Like there's people you have to pay all the time. So basically, you can see a money trail of money moving. We have a lease for the same amount of money, and that way I can. For my visa application. Even when I went to go into the Social Security office, I had an address to mail stuff. I had so I have an office. Honestly, I've never been to my office. It's an empty room with nothing in it. They might even use it for other things. I don't even know. But I have an office.
Once you have the visa, do you have to reapply?
Yeah, so it's good for 5 years,
right?
If you live in the United States and you move down there, you can start the application to go for the green card from the E2 visa. But it's not a stepping stone to it. It's a whole new application, but you can't go to the green card at all if you don't live in the United States.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, that's interesting. Oh man, so many questions. Do you do any short-term rentals down there?
So
one of your
did.
strategies? You did.
I did. So I don't know if I should tell this story on this podcast, but
don't worry, nobody listens to it anyways.
Anyway, we had maybe I'll tell you off air. we had a castle. Or we still have the castle. We turned it into a triplex. But we had this castle and we were renting it on Airbnb. And it was so big with so many rooms that it was a block away from a university. And it attracted parties.
Yeah.
Right? And so that one was like just a bad experience that we turned into a triplex. The story I was going to have is one of the parties. It's pretty wild. I wasn't there. Just what I get hearsay from the property manager. We also did one that we put it... It was actually supposed to be a burr, and then we're like, hey, the area where this is located, we're like 2 blocks from the zoo, we're like 10 blocks from 3 different hospitals. We're like basically in the middle of a triangle, and we're in this perfect spot for Airbnb. So we did do Airbnb on that one, but honestly, I still found it was always weekends. We changed it to a midterm rental. That worked for a little while, and honestly, it was a lot of work. If you have a lot of properties, it's just you're gonna have to hire property managers or find somewhere to scale this because it was a lot of work to keep up with all these texts and emails and everything else. So we turned it to a lease option, and we're selling it to a rent to own basically.
Yeah.
So the tenant's gonna buy it, so they put down a deposit and they pay a higher rent so that in 3 years they can just close on the property, and they've built up fix their credit problems and stuff ideally during that period of time. So I've really only done those. I actually had one other one, but it was in the castle after we triplexed it. We turned one of the units a different way around into another unit. We Airbnb'd that. Actually, we just relisted that. It is up on Airbnb again now, one of the unit in the castle. But it's just... I tried doing it myself, and I tried hiring property manager to do the other one, and I don't know. It depends on the area. I found that ours were like full, like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 3 days a week, and empty Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And honestly, when I was looking at the numbers, and when you're paying the utilities and you're paying all the stuff that you normally could put on a tenant, I'm like, we weren't. It was still more money to make with Airbnb, but it was the amount of work to the amount of profit. It didn't make sense. So a lot of them I just convert them back to.
Yeah. Well, it's mental headspace too, right? That you get it occupies that instead of like, there's a tenant in there, I kind of forget about it. I got the property manager to worry about it. And yeah,
exactly.
If you're gonna do one, you might as well do 10.
You can hire that out, but property managers on Airbnbs are very expensive. Like you're talking 20 or 30%.
I know.
Sometimes higher.
Mark does it for a living.
That's why we do it. Well, I mean, honestly, the margins are much better in the States than, like even on Airbnb for management, better in the States than here, for sure. So I'm looking forward to doing more of that. So maybe we'll talk about your castle after.
What keeps blowing my mind is how properties in the States seem to be selling for so far below replacement cost. Like you talked about that place, that $500,000 mansion with a pool and a river. Like, how much would that cost to build? And it's selling for $5. Like, why are they selling for so cheap? Like, what is $100,000 house actually made out of down there? Like, is it?
That's the funny thing. It could be made out of like. It could be still fully made out of bricks. I bought a side-by-side duplex, which in Canada would be 2 semi-detached, right? But it's one building in the U.S.A. It's called a duplex. And we bought it for $35,000, and it was almost 4,000 square feet of brick on the outside. And I remember I was talking to some people at a real estate meetup in London, and they were like, I think the bricks are worth that. If you just tore the house down, you can sell the bricks for that much money. Like it cost me $35,000 to get the bricks to brick a house that size.
Yeah, see, that just doesn't make sense. Like, why? I don't know. Why would you be able to get more money for that property? Just the area doesn't demand it, or there's nobody who wants to
the areas don't demand it. Areas change. Yeah, it depends on the market too. Like you'll find that part. I think
like, do we see that same sort of phenomenon in Canada? Not really. Like, I don't know. There's
not really, but like it's there's just like areas that's just the rent is, or even the value of the property is dictated at a certain sort of price, and if you think you can push it past where the actual threshold is, you're wrong. And that's one of the mistakes Canadians do make, is not understanding that, not understanding the lines where neighborhoods end, where other neighborhoods start. That even if a neighborhood crosses a freeway, I would consider it a different neighborhood. Like just getting those lines right. You could be right on the road, and the road property across the road from you could be like 300,000, and the one on the other side could be 100,000. And you go, why? Doesn't make any sense. But their schools aren't the same. They're not the same like they are in Canada. Like the best school to the worst school in Canada from the best school to the worst school in the U.S. is drastically different in that same city. And if one's in a different school district than the other one, it ain't worth the same, because people specifically don't want to go to that school. And because of that, those schools never get better, and the areas don't get better because of this way I don't know how you call it, their government works on this. But if the amount the school gets is a certain percentage of what the house values are of the property taxes, and the houses are all worth way less, and they're worth way more on the other side, one school gets literally could be 3 times as much money as the other school, right? And then where do you think the good teachers want to go? Where do you think the people want to go? Where do people want to live? They're going to move there. Sometimes you get dumb lucky, you'll get someone else who doesn't understand this, and they don't have any kids, and so they haven't really looking at it as deeply, and they might buy on the wrong side of the road. But as the investor, you need to do your own due diligence and make sure you're not making this mistake yourself.
Yeah. It's there's so much opportunity, and I mean even the major, like Brent alluded to, sort of the 3 major metros in Canada, and maybe you can add Calgary to that now. But I mean, how many major cities of, 1 million or more? I can't remember. It was like 30 or something in the States. Yeah. And then you break it down even further, right? And then you look at population shifts. Just the amount of population. It's so foreign. So foreign to us as Canadians, because we'll get a little bit of inter-province migration, but by and large, people are staying in the same areas. But you can have major shifts like we're seeing now from sort of California to Texas and the southern states, right, in Florida, where
Texas has like the population and number of cities as Canada, just Texas.
Exactly. So, okay, so Glenn, you do your own private investing, but you also do coaching.
Yeah.
Right, and I don't know, tell us a little bit about the coaching side of things.
Yeah, so I used to do it as like a Zoom call. We did it for like an hour a week for 12 weeks. Back in October, we had 8 classes running. I do like 5 people at a time because I didn't want to do big classes. Because I do big classes, people don't get their questions answered, and they don't get what they need out of it. And I had 8 classes running, and I was like, this doesn't make any sense. You read all these books about scaling yourself and being efficient. You're like, this doesn't make any sense. I'm doing 80 of these right now. And so I changed it into a course where they do they get all of the material recordings. We've been adding about 2 recordings every month. I keep recording more information. It's usually with students. Somebody calls me asking a question, go through a whole rip on how to remove a contractor lien, and then I'm like, well, got to go sit down and record that, and so they can put it into the course. Because I'm like, you have so much information in your head, you just have to keep putting it out. Yeah. So anyway, I made it into a course. The problem with the course is people want me. And so then we created a mastermind that's connected to it. And then the mastermind, the course is about how to do it, and then the mastermind is doing it, like how to actually go and do it. Like, let's sit down, let's answer your questions, let's do the one-on-one calls, let's do the group calls, let's do it, and let's just make it go. Let's just get it to the finish line. Let's have somebody that, when your closing date gets pushed, that you can just call and go, what is going on? And I go, this is normal. This is this is what's going on. This is what the lender is looking for. This is why it's happening. Just to have someone to bounce that off of. Yeah, so that in a nutshell, that's kind of what it is. It's a coaching program and then a mastermind to implement the stuff from it.
And that's that can be found through your website, I'm assuming. We'll
or
link to that.
glensutherland.com/coaching.
Okay, yeah. So we'll link that in the show notes for people who want to check it out.
Yeah, and the one thing that I kind of liked about your approach, which you talked about earlier, is like it's not the flashy, like you're standing in front of a Ferrari and like, you know, like Tom Fu on the yacht, you know, do you want to stay poor or you want to be rich like me? Buy this, right? Where you're buying like things that are attainable, right? Like it might be I don't know, a place, you know, closer to the border here for 150 grand, and you kind of walk through like, here's what we did, and it's like, yeah, I could do that. I could see me doing that. I have enough money to actually do that, and I think I could, like really. So it's I don't know. It's like realistic reality. Your own reality show.
Yeah, and even a lot of times when people are taking the course, they're like, sometimes people have these crazy expectations. They're like, this is a real call. They're like, hey, I have $100,000. 50 of it's on a home equity line of credit, 50 of it's cash. Could I take this $50,000 or $100,000 and within like a year, I want to turn it into $150,000 a year cash flow? And I'm like, I literally had this call, and I was like, I'm not going to say you can't do that, but I'm going to say that that's higher, above what the standard results are. I'm like, I'm gonna say that you better be like doing this full time and working your butt off, right? And you better be prepared to raise money.
Yeah.
Yeah. But sometimes like you don't necessarily need money. Like that's the thing, right? To do a Canadian real estate, you're like, hey, even just to buy this house, I might need $100 grand as a down payment to buy this property, right? Whereas in the United States, hey, I'm buying, $150,000 house. And you're like, well, what do I need? You're like, oh, I need like 30, 40 grand. And you know what? Anyone who owns a home in Canada could be your joint venture, your private money lender, because they all have a home equity line of credit, or they have the cash to do that, because our economy with the house prices, anyone who's been bought it from like 2016, like we were talking at the start, they have that, right? Or they have the ability to access that cash. And so it opens up, if you want to build a business and you want to scale a business, you can totally do this, right? And a lot of people want to do it with their own money, and you're like, honestly, yes. Do the first couple with your own money, because you need proof of concept. No one's going to lend money to someone who's never done this before. At least they shouldn't. Go out, do it, buy a property, renovate it, flip it, refinance it, whatever you want to do. Have a whole slide deck that shows exactly how you did this and the problems you had and how to solve these problems in the future and why this will never happen again and what you've set up as your systems to make it so this doesn't happen again. And those are good stories. People will invest in those stories.
Yeah, and they're realistic, which I like it.
Yeah.
No glitz, no glamour. So awesome, Glenn. I don't know, is there anything else you wanted to get out there? We're just approaching the hour mark, so we'll wrap it up. Anything else we didn't talk about?
You asked earlier about mistakes.
Yeah.
I did make a whole video on mistakes just like 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
So if you want the video, and it comes with like a whole thing, it's called, you go to CanadianInvestingInTheUSA.com/mistakes. It's free if you want it.
Okay. Right. Mistakes are free.
It just popped in my head. But
we'll link to that too, because I'm sure that'll be interesting. Probably a lot of people want to learn stuff. So.
Well, we talk about that a lot, right? Like you can make mistakes, but you make them once and you learn from them. And ideally, if someone else made a mistake, you learn from theirs, and that's just free. It might have cost you 10 grand, but for me, it's free. Yeah. So that's awesome.
I do if you watch those videos I have recorded, I do love to go on. Even if you listen to my podcast, I love to go on side tangents and tell stories, and there's plenty of mistakes I've made that I don't make anymore.
Oh, yeah, that's awesome, Glenn. So people can find you at CanadianInvestingInTheUS.com, was it?
Yep, Canadian Investing in the U.S., CanadianInvestingInTheUSA.com, GlenSutherland.com. Honestly, they're all basically the same website.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, they all point you. All roads lead to Glenn. And then you've also got the podcast, A Canadian Investing in the U.S., and that's usually more like bite-sized things where you get an expert on and just or a guest on and talk for a little bit about a topic. And
yeah, I'm gonna have to get you guys on. But yeah, what I typically do is I say it's like 15, 20 minutes. And I used to do them as long as they wanted, and people would like take so long to get to the point. So I started rushing them. Sometimes we still go longer, right? You'll get the odd episode that's like an hour long, but just usually say 15, 20 minutes, and we just like hear stories about other people that are doing it. Like someone says in my Facebook group, they're like, "Hey, I just bought a property in, Cincinnati," and I'm like, "Hey, you want to do a 15-minute chat and record it and tell the story? Tell me." They're like, "Oh, some stuff didn't go well." Those are the best ones.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Glenn, thank you so much. We appreciate your time, man. And
this was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, we try to have a little bit of fun when we do this. So, no, I look forward to chatting with you more as I anyways explore the U.S. a little further, and maybe we'll drag Brent along one day.
Yeah. Sounds good. You said you're in Ontario, so we'll.
Yeah, I live just outside of Waterloo.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Hamilton. So.
We're Hamilton, not far. So awesome. Okay, for our listeners, I hope you guys got a lot out of that. You want to learn more about U.S. investing, look up glensutherland.com and his other websites, and a lot of good content on there. So until next time,
steward your wealth wisely.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Two Stewards Show. If you like my voice better, click subscribe.
And if you like my voice better, click share.
If you like both, give us a 5-star rating.
To interact with the show, feel free to reach out at hello@twostewards.ca.
We'll see you in the next episode. In the meantime, steward your wealth wisely.